I recently came across the little talked about fact that both tren and deca, or trenbolone and nandrolone decanoate, both affect the dopamine system, but not necessarily the serotonergic or the serotonin. And what that means to me is when serotonin is normal or low and dopamine is high, it changes behavior. Not to mention the stuff we could really get into with how it affects the receptors themselves and changes the type of dopamine receptors that are active. So when we talk about personality changes, roid rage, that sort of thing, I believe this is one very strong component to it. Is we're experiencing brain chemistry changes where dopamine is high, so we think we're 8 feet tall and invincible, and serotonin is normal or low, and in many cases lower, and I'll get into why in a moment, and that causes us to feel like we're low status, okay? Serotonin is the chemical associated with accomplishment, learning, knowledge, ability, confidence, and that sort of thing. It's all about your perspective. If you're low on the dominance hierarchy, you're the grunt, you're the bottom of the hill where all the you know what runs down to, your serotonin levels are going to be lower than if you climbed the corporate ladder or you become the boss and you're in charge and you have higher status. That's serotonin on a practical day to day level. Dopamine is something different. Dopamine is the brain hormone that's released when we eat a delicious chocolate, or when we have sex, or we drink, or we do drugs. For example, cocaine raises dopamine hugely, but methamphetamine raises it 100 times greater than cocaine. So when you see somebody that's completely burnt out from using meth or something like that, oftentimes they're in an advanced stage of anhedonia from not being able to, they've burnt out their dopamine receptors and their ability to produce and feel joy and experience emotion. And that's why, it's because they've burned it out through overexpression. And that's why there's such significant changes in people's brains when they use methamphetamine. You'll often have somebody that's gone from being a very intelligent, high IQ person to somebody that's barely employable just after a few months of use. And as sad as that is, there is a reason for it. And I think some of the same thing applies to certain anabolic steroids, specifically tren and deca. Like I said, I'm not going to get deep into that, but I'll link this study in the description. This is a pretty good deep dive into a lot of different aspects of AAA, androgenic anabolic steroid use. And this is a pretty good breakdown of anabolic androgenic steroid use and its effects on the dopaminergic system. To further illustrate my point about how brain chemistry can get off using anabolic steroids, and even some other substances, I'd like to talk about undermethylation. Now, this isn't something that I seem to have a lot of problem with when I was young. When I was in my 20s, I could use trenbolone, deca, whatever I wanted, without significant or unmanageable anxiety, aggression, insomnia, etc. I did have some night sweats and some insomnia, but it was a combination of cabergoline and trenbolone that was the culprit in that case. I dropped the caber and I was fine. It wasn't the best sleep I ever had, but it was manageable. Now that I'm older, I think somewhere around 10 years ago, somebody offered me some trenbolone, and I tried just the tiniest amount here and there, and it was not recommended. So something had changed. And I noticed, actually, Big Paul from Anabolic Bodybuilding talking about, something very similar with him. He's done with DECA and NPP, and he's dropped tren a while back. And I've tried to explain to him before what I think's going on based on my own experiences. And I don't know if he's real receptive to it or not, but I put something out there about methylation and how that can actually cause more aggression, more insomnia. And let me just read what I wrote here. Okay, I put something about this doesn't address all the issues, but there could be methylation issues, etc., etc. I've talked about this before, so referring back to this post again. What does norepinephrine have to do with nandrolone just because they both have nor, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. So here's a quote. In the adrenal medulla, norepinephrine is converted to epinephrine in a methylation step catalyzed by the phenylethanol N-methyl transferase. So an enzyme essentially that transfers norepinephrine to epinephrine. So noradrenaline to adrenaline. S-adenosylmethionine. SAM, let's just call it that, is the methyl donor. Okay. Some of us lack this transferase enzyme, so we don't convert, or we have a very small amount of it. taking extra methyl donors can actually help that situation by allowing more of that transfer to happen from noradrenaline to adrenaline. And this person that was, calling me out here says epinephrine is also a much more potent feeling than norepinephrine, not the other way around. So for part two, norepinephrine can lead to euphoria, very happy feelings, but are also linked to panic attacks, elevated blood pressure, and hyperactivity. And the other issue that comes along is with undermethylation, as we can see here, is a condition that can lead to a number of health issues, including low serotonin neurotransmission and low levels of norepinephrine. So it's a catch-22. It can go either way. So if you've got this situation going where you're missing this transferase and you're not methylating in this way, and you've got high norepinephrine, you're going to be really agitated, have insomnia, etc., or it can lower serotonin or lower serotonin, and you'll feel like crap while having high dopamine still, or high odd forms of dopamine because of the changes that DECA has caused. Are you starting to see how this can just twist things? And if you've had a cycle before where psychologically you just felt off, you know that this kind of describes your personal experience. It's just things got kind of twisted. There's even some people that say, yeah, this changed my sexuality or my sexual preferences or my sexual habits. That's very possible. It could bring out a different aspect of your brain that you've never known before and shut off other parts. We're talking about serious brain chemistry here. Serotonin is what many antidepressants are based off of, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I'm on paroxetine myself, and I like to keep those levels very stable, and I like to keep an eye on those levels. Now, to be frank, sometimes when I'm using something like oxytocin, now oxytocin will actually raise dopamine and raise serotonin, so it's a little more of an even split, but does it raise each the same, and does it raise each the same in every person? I'm sure it doesn't. And I notice there's times where my serotonin feels low, my dopamine feels high, the balance is off. So I'll actually slightly, take another half a pill, another 50% more during those times just to balance that out, and it does the trick. So what my advice to people that suffer with undermethylation and symptoms of undermethylation, I want you to do your own research on how that might be affecting you, because if you look up symptoms and you're seeing yourself in there, you might find a way back from the leaves and these results that we're seeing all the way back to the cause, okay? You can question yourself. Am I taking things that are lowering serotonin? Am I taking things that are not allowing, proper methylation to occur, or too much of this load and it's depleting my own methyl donors? But two things you can do. Number one, if you read through this sort of literature and you find that you really are having serotonin issues in general, if you find that this is something that you've just overlooked, you have like low-grade depression off and on through your whole life, you may be just low at converting serotonin as it is. Get on an SSRI if you think that's, if you and your doctor believe that that's the best course for you, but it's something to look at. It's nice to have a little control over that if you really need it and if you have issues. The other thing that you can do that's just over the counter is use a strong methyl donor. I prefer trimethylglycine, also known as betaine anhydrous. Now, betaine hydrochloride is not the same thing. We need the methyl, right? So we need the methyl donors from that. Trimethylglycine has 3 methyl donors, and that's why it's such a nice catch-all. And not to mention it's cheap. Yeah, it's like $15 for a pound, okay? It's cheap, and you're taking like a small teaspoon a day or a couple of half teaspoons a day or something, and that's a nice chunk. You can take 3 grams, 5 grams, something like that. And think about that. There's no way that you're making that much of a methyl donors in your body and stuff like that if you're the type of person that has this problem. This is the raw material that can help you get there. I don't sell it. I don't benefit from it. I'm just telling you it's an underrated product that really helps with the biological processes of fat loss, muscle building, etc., etc., etc. But it's one of those things that if you don't have an issue with it, you're not going to know. Kind of like creatine. If you're depleted on it, when you take creatine, you put on 5 pounds, you get stronger. If you already are chock full of it because you eat beef all day, you're not going to notice. This is the same type of thing, only biologically. If you don't have problems with methylation, or those enzymes or these drugs or whatever, you're not going to notice anything. But if you are depleted and you need a boost, raw natural product, there you go. Cheap, easily available, doesn't taste bad. It has kind of a sweet taste. Put it in your coffee. Put some sweetener in there. Put it in your flavored drink, whatever.